Good evening. This is Dr. McDaniel. I'm continuing the information on can we prevent cervical cancer? And the answer is yes, we can. I'm coming from Italy today. I'm in Venice. We have a new hotel room. This is the view from our hotel room because we're in a hotel that's on the Grand Canal. So I don't know why I can't flip this around, but I can't flip it around. So I don't know what people are seeing and what they're not seeing, but this is the view from our hotel. Very pretty. I was in Venice about maybe, I can't even recall, almost 20 years ago, maybe 18 years ago or so. So it's nice to be back. Okay. I'll do tomorrow's broadcast from out and about in the streets. So I'm going to sit here in front of we're not going to get a background like this too often, if not for a long time. So can we prevent cervical cancer? The answer is yes, we can. And there are a couple of ways. I've been speaking on this for a while now, for the last couple of days, and I'll just do a really brief recap for anyone who perhaps has not seen any of the previous episodes. And there are two ways that we attempt to prevent cervical cancer. The first way is to provide a vaccine. The vaccine is Gardasil. It's Gardasil 9. And Gardasil 9 covers 7 of the high-risk strains of HPV that we know are predominantly responsible for cervical cancer. The catch of the vaccine is that we don't have a blood test for it, so there's no way to confirm that anyone is immune to those 7 high-risk strains out of the 14 that are considered the most dangerous for cervical cancer. And because we don't have blood tests, we don't have any way to know who needs the vaccine, who doesn't need it, who mounted an immunity, who didn't, and who needs a booster shot. So it's what I call the better than nothing vaccine, because it is better than nothing. Excuse me, but it's not as good as all of the other vaccines available on the market. The catch of cervical cancer is that it is an infectious cancer. It's not inherited. It's not a genetic cancer. So it's potentially preventable with that vaccine. Otherwise, the best method of preventing cervical cancer is simply getting the Pap Smear screening or the Pap test, because the Pap test looks to see if there's any evidence of precancerous changes present at any given point in time. So the nice part about cervical cancer is that it does lend itself amenable to testing. And the Pap test is basically a brief exfoliation of the cervix. Those exfoliated cells are placed on a microscopic slide and evaluated to see if the cells look normal or if they look abnormal. And if they look abnormal, to what degree of abnormality is present. Now, the conventional Pap smear, we as physicians did them in the examination room. So I would take a little spatula and a brush, exfoliate or rub the outer portion of the cervix and the inner portion of the cervix with the brush. Apply that to the microscopic slide, spray a fixative, put the cover slip on, and send it to the lab. And that's the Pap test. The lab would then just process it and evaluate it under the microscope. I have not done a conventional Pap smear since approximately 1998. Since 1998, maybe 1999, I've only done the liquid Pap smears. And the liquid Pap smear, we take that same spatula and the brush, we briefly exfoliate the cervix, get those cervical cells, swish them around in the liquid, and that tube of liquid is sent to the lab. The lab then centrifuges it. They spin off the cervical cells. They create a very thin layer of those cervical cells on the microscopic slide, and they're able to evaluate that. The liquid Pap smear, or the most common one, is called thin prep. That's one I've always used. The nice thing with the thin prep is it eliminates a lot of environmental factors. The first environmental factor is that when we do the conventional, the traditional Pap smear, it's a thick glob of microscopic cells and mucus and body fluids. And that includes red blood cells, white blood cells. So microscopically, it's a big hunk of material. We try to thinly spread it across the microscopic slide, but of course, we don't have microscopic eyes. So when they process that conventional slide and look at it under the microscope, it's several layers of cervical cells. They may be clumped up in some areas and they may be thinner in other areas. But what they have to do is they have to identify as many cells as possible and confirm that they're all normal. And you can imagine if you have a clumped up layer upon layer of cells, a group of them in some areas, you're not going to be able to identify specific features for each cell. Or if you have a bunch of mucus, debris, red blood cells, white blood cells present in some areas, it's going to obscure the cervical cells, and you're not going to have a confident evaluation that that person has normal cervical cells. So there are a lot of environmental factors present with the conventional Pap smear. With the liquid Pap smear, or the thin prep specifically, they're able to spin off the cervical cells and create a distinct thin layer, one cell layer deep, of the cervical cells. They have a quality assurance, and I've been informed by the labs that they are supposed to have more than 2,000 cervical cells present per liquid tube. They run that through the computer, and spectroscopy, they can see how many cervical cells are present. If they don't have at least 2,000 cervical cells, it does not pass their quality assurance. They don't even look at the Pap smear. They don't run the Pap smear. The person has to have another Pap smear done. So that's a quality assurance that they have an adequate sample size. Once they know they have the adequate sample size, they spin off the cervical cells and they create a thin layer so that they're able to see all of the features of the cervical cells present on that slide. And for them to say that there are abnormal cells present, they have to have specific features that are consistent with precancerous changes. And we say precancerous, the medical term is dysplasia, dysplasia. The pathology doctors will not write dysplasia. They used to say or write CIN, which stood for cervical intraepithelial neoplasia. That got replaced or outmoded around 20 years ago or so. It was around 1996, maybe 97. It got replaced with SIL, which stands for squamous intraepithelial lesion. They changed that nomenclature or the wording for the Pap smear because if someone had abnormal changes, we did a biopsy. They used to categorize the biopsy as SIL, but then the Pap was CIN. The CIN had 3 different categories. The biopsy SIL had 2, so it became a bit cumbersome, and communication wasn't as specific or distinct when we were going back and forth between the CIN 3 levels and the SIL 2 levels for the biopsy. So they changed it so that the Pap and the biopsies would correlate. But if you do an internet search, you're going to see CIN all over the place, SIL all over the place, and dysplasia. Those are all 3 different ways to say the same thing. So when they do the thin prep, the liquid Pap smear, they're able to specifically and distinctly see the features of all the cervical cells. And that they're able to see if morphologically or physically the form of the cervical cells all look normal. Now, the second advantage of the liquid Pap smears is that they have that Pap juice left over, and that Pap juice has body fluids. And what they're able to do with the body fluids is they're able to run it for a culture, and that culture looks for presence or activity of the human papillomavirus or HPV. So now what they're able to do with the liquid pap smears is they can determine if at the time of the pap smear this lady did or did not have activity of the virus that causes cervical cancer present when she underwent the pap smear. And that's important because we can correlate the pap cells, and we can correlate, get a little better background there, we can correlate the pap cells, and we can correlate if there's viral activity of the virus that causes cervical cancer at the time of the pap smear. So with the liquid pap smear, we're able to have somewhat of a checks and balances, because we can determine if the cells look abnormal, if there's viral activity present at the time of those abnormal cells or not, or if the cells look normal, was there actually viral activity present at the time of those cells looking normal. And as I stated previously, the pap smear is a screening test, and by definition in medicine, whenever we have a screening test will never give us 100% gospel truth for the answer. They're not diagnostic tests. So screening tests are ways to take big lumps and clumps of people and divvy them into two huge groups. People we can afford to ignore because they're at a decreased risk for the problem we're looking at, versus people we have to look closer at because they're potentially at an increased risk for that same problem. The catch with screening test is you're always going to have a few people in the wrong group, and we call those a true versus a false, normal or abnormal. I'll go into more detail on that and hopefully conclude this series on pap smear screening and cervical cancer prevention tomorrow. Thank you for watching. This is Dr. McDaniel at GYN Corner. Please check out the YouTube channel. That's also called GYN Corner. It lags about a week from the Facebook pages. I usually do these live, but since I'm traveling, the internet access is spotty and sketchy, so I'm taping them daily and loading them when I get the internet access, which is why I taped yesterday, but I didn't get a chance to load it till this afternoon. And hopefully I'll be able to load this one today, and likewise for tomorrow. Have a great rest of the day. I'll leave you with this last background.